She said she needed some time to breathe, and I believed her. While she was supposedly on a girls' trip, she emptied our joint account and left me with a 3-word message. I'm not coming back. No explanation, no goodbye, just the coldness of someone who had planned everything in advance. I was betrayed by the person who shared my bed and my name on the bank statement. But what she didn't know was that every move she made was already being tracked, and the final blow was just beginning. My name is Charles Lindell. I'm 52 years old, and I work as a tax consultant in Charlotte, North Carolina. For over 2 decades, I've helped major companies and wealthy families handle issues most people don't even know exist, but that could wipe out entire fortunes. I was married to Denise for 17 years. It wasn't a fairy tale, but I always thought we were in it together. She ran a small handmade ceramics business, which I helped keep afloat, even when the profits barely covered the studio's rent. And that was okay. I liked the idea of supporting her, or at least I thought I did. Our routine was stable, maybe too predictable. Monday through Friday at the office, Saturday washing the car, and Sunday at my mother-in-law's house, with the same roast chicken and her brother's same old jokes. We smiled in photos, paid our bills on time, and in front of our friends we played the part of a perfect couple. But some cracks started to show when she began disappearing more often. First, it was the digital marketing classes at night. Then came the out-of-town workshops. What used to be Sunday lunches together turned into a plate left in the microwave with a note saying, "I already ate." Of course I noticed, but instead of confrontation, I chose analysis. Because I know how numbers tell stories, and so do behaviors. She started changing her habits, wearing clothes she'd never bought with me, talking less about shop clients, and more about new projects. Instead of questioning her, I quietly watched the patterns unfold. I wasn't paranoid, but when something doesn't add up, my tax instincts kick in. And Denise was no longer adding up to the Denise I knew. There was one night in particular that set off a red flag. I came home early from a canceled meeting and found her on the phone, laughing in a way she hadn't laughed with me in a long time. When she saw me, she went quiet. "It was Leticia," she said, naming a friend I knew was out of town. I didn't argue, but from that day on, I started jotting down dates, keeping receipts, and reviewing bank statements more often. I knew that when emotions fail, logic has to take over, and it was that logic that kept me grounded. I didn't play the victim. I kept doing my part as a husband, as the provider of the household, partly because I still held on to a sliver of hope that it was just a phase. But with every new excuse, every night she needed space, my trust slipped away like sand through my fingers. I knew something was coming, and the most ironic part? Even though I was expecting it, the fall still caught me off guard. The message came on a Monday morning just after 7. I was still in a towel making coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a short text, blunt, cold as a bank alert. "I'm not coming home. I took care of what I needed." No period, no explanation. For a second, I thought it was a prank. But when I opened my banking app and saw that $94,200 had been transferred to a new account, in her name, the silence in the house turned into a roar inside my head. She didn't call, didn't leave a note, nothing. Just that one-line message and a gutted bank account. The hit was planned. Denise waited for the exact moment. She knew I'd be home alone, knew my business partner was out of the country, and that the bank would take at least 24 hours to block a large transfer. When I realized all that, I didn't just feel betrayed as a husband. I felt humiliated as a professional. I was a financial consultant. I helped people protect themselves from fraud, and I got taken down in my own home. I didn't yell, didn't throw anything. I just sat there for about 40 minutes staring at the computer screen. Every number felt like a punch to the gut. Withdrawals during meetings, purchases that never arrived at the house, an emotional layoff signed digitally, with pure disdain. And even with the betrayal laid out in plain data, I stayed silent, because right then I knew any impulsive reaction could be used against me later. I opened a blank spreadsheet and typed just one word: plan. That was the only control I had left in that moment. I knew trying to talk to her would only give her a chance to play the victim or flip the script. No, I wouldn't give her that power. I had to be calculated. Every step needed to be thought out to the inch. And at that moment I decided I didn't just want to get back what was mine. I wanted justice, but not the theatrical kind. No yelling at courthouse doors or airing dirty laundry with screenshots. I wanted the kind of justice that comes from knowing the system and working it quietly. The justice of someone who has the patience to wait for the right moment, even while their blood is boiling. And that decision, even though it tore me up inside, was what kept me from making mistakes that would have cost me far more than money. That same morning, while the world still thought I was asleep, I activated my protocol. No confrontation, no drama. I opened the safe where I kept old documents, transaction records, and contracts Denise didn't even know I still had. Yeah, I've always been organized, but over time I learned to be quietly paranoid. Because when you work helping families avoid financial ruin, you learn that the worst hits always come from the ones who know your passwords. First step, lock everything down. Cards, auto payments, permissions on the joint account, frozen. Within 2 hours, even her banking app was asking for a new authentication code, one she'd never receive. I called my lawyer, Amanda, a woman whose protected estate's way bigger than mine, and simply said, "It's time." She got it instantly. I didn't need to explain. I just gave her the names, the dates, the amounts. She'd handle everything on the legal front. I'd take care of the rest. I grabbed a whiteboard in my home office and wrote down 4 names. Denise Trey, the so-called business partner I was beginning to suspect, my accountant, and a former client who, coincidentally, had done business with her too. If there was a pattern, it was in there. I started cross-referencing data. I found split transfers, bills paid from my business account, and a string of small deposits into a savings account she never used. This wasn't just a marital betrayal. It was a financial one. And that changed everything. She wasn't just a confused wife looking for freedom. She was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and had a plan. But unlike hers, mine didn't need noise. Yes, I wanted justice, but more than anything, I wanted control. Nothing stung more than seeing someone trying to steal not just my money but my dignity. And if there's one thing you should never take from a man who works with numbers, it's the peace of knowing where every cent goes. Right there, in that focused silence, I realized this wasn't just going to be a breakup. It was going to be a process, a chess match, and for that, I had to keep a straight face, even if inside I wanted to punch a wall. But that's where revenge starts to shift. It stops being rage and turns into strategy. And that's exactly when something unexpected landed in my lap, revealing just how deep this whole thing really went. It was on a Thursday night that everything started to fall into place. I was going over some old spreadsheets when I noticed a strange pattern. The same business ID showed up as the recipient on 3 transfers authorized by Denise. The name tied to it? Trey Harmon. The partner in that ceramic studio she claimed was just providing logistical support. That set off an immediate alarm. Because Trey didn't have any business background, what he did have was a tax default filed in Georgia and an open IRS case for accounting fraud. The very type of fraud I spend my career preventing behind the scenes. I managed to trace the connection between them through a string of microtransactions spread out over 11 months. And the worst part? Most of the money came from bank accounts under my name, tied to companies that only I was supposed to access. Denise had used old passwords, altered PDFs, and even the digital stamp we used to file her shop's taxes, all of it linked to my social security number. This wasn't just an unfaithful wife anymore. This was a coordinated fraud between 2 people who had been plotting my downfall for months. I called my brother Jason, a forensic analyst with experience investigating corporate crimes. We spent the whole night cross-checking data, pulling IRS records, reviewing digitally signed receipts. And that's when we uncovered the final blow. Denise had co-signed a $150,000 loan with Trey, using my business as collateral, without my consent. The signature? Forged. The contract number issued by a fintech system that allowed remote uploads. In other words, it all looked legal at first glance. until you started tugging at the thread. Jason looked at me and said, "If you hadn't kept those backups, Charles, they would have buried you with a lawsuit that you'd be left holding the bag for." And that's when it hit me. I had almost been fired from my own reputation. This wasn't just about a bank account or a broken marriage. It was about who I was as a man, as a professional, as someone who had always protected his family and built everything on trust. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to use my name to cushion their fall. From that moment on, the word revenge lost its flavor. It wasn't personal anymore. It was structural. It was about the system, about legal loopholes, about modern criminals who use relationships as cover and marriage as a springboard. If I let it go, it would become a precedent, not just for me, but for every man who still believes that doing the right thing protects you from being a target. And in that moment, staring at forged contracts and a drained joint account, I made my decision. Either I exposed everything, or I'd become an accomplice to my own silence. The first move was legal. Amanda, my lawyer, filed for an emergency asset freeze against Denise and Trey, citing imminent risk of asset depletion and document forgery. We used every receipt, screenshot, digital proof, and cross-statement as evidence. The judge approved it within 48 hours. Their bank accounts were frozen, contracts suspended, and even the car she had financed under my name was repossessed by the lender. Quietly, the net started closing in. Meanwhile, I contacted the compliance departments at 2 banks where Trey was trying to secure credit. With the documents we had gathered, we managed to block the transfer of any funds tied to my company. One of the bank managers even thanked me, said I had helped prevent a possible case of money laundering through third-party accounts. That gave me a strange feeling. Relief, yes, but also a cold fury, knowing how much they had counted on me doing nothing. The hardest part came when I had to face her lawyers during mediation. They walked in smiling, like everything was negotiable. Denise wouldn't look me in the eye. When they saw the stack of documents Amanda laid out on the table, the mood shifted. We presented the loans, the forgeries, the transfers, one by one. No yelling, no theatrics. Just facts. Her lawyer cleared his throat and asked for a recess. When they came back, they offered a deal. Denise would keep the studio and the car, but she'd take full responsibility for the debts in her own name. I wouldn't contest anything else, and in return, they wouldn't try to reverse the court's freeze order. I accepted, not out of weakness, but because by that point I had already won. I didn't need to see them punished anymore. I just wanted distance. But before leaving the room, I looked straight at her and said, "You weren't clever. You were just dishonest." She trembled, said nothing, and in that moment I realized it wasn't revenge I wanted. It was closure. Trey reached out a few days later, said he wanted to clear things up, sent an email claiming he'd been misled too, that Denise told him I was in on everything. I just forwarded the message to my attorney with a single line: "Respond as instructed." It wasn't time to give a stage to people who never stood by their word. Justice isn't served through arguments. It's built in the quiet by those who planned their moves well, and mine was airtight. After the mediation, I never heard her voice again. But that doesn't mean she didn't try to reach out. 3 weeks later, I got an unmarked envelope at the front desk of my building. Inside was a handwritten letter and the necklace I had given her for our 10th anniversary. The letter read, "I didn't think things would go this far. No apology, no remorse. Just a poorly calculated trace of guilt." I tore up the letter, kept the necklace, and as evidence, not as a keepsake. A few days later, she messaged me on WhatsApp. "If you ever want to talk like 2 adults, I'm open to it." I read it, left it on read. Because talking to someone who lied for that long is like trying to stitch rotten fabric. It won't hold. And more than that, I knew she didn't want to talk. She wanted control. That quiet kind of control, dressed up as maturity, meant to keep the door slightly open. I closed it and locked it. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. Trey vanished. From what I've heard, the studio shut down not long after, and he moved back to his hometown, trying to start another business under someone else's name. I didn't follow up. didn't care. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that anyone who builds on lies digs their own downfall. Justice had already done what needed to be done, and I wasn't going to waste another minute feeding people who live off deception. My therapist said, in one of the few sessions I agreed to, that the hardest part of trauma isn't the event itself. It's how long it takes to stop occupying space inside you. And I finally got what she meant when, on a random Tuesday, I went to the same bakery as always and realized it didn't hurt anymore to see the coffee she liked. I looked at the counter, ordered mine, and sat on the other side of the room. Because even habits need distance when your soul decides to move on. There was no drama, no emotional showdown, no closure scene. Just a man who realized that true revenge is never having to think about the person who tried to destroy you ever again. And when people ask why I didn't press criminal charges, I say, because some things the system can't fix, but life can. And that, my friend, that never fails. Today, I live in a smaller, simpler house, just a few minutes from the park where I used to walk on Sundays. I traded marble floors for lightwood, the two-car garage for an electric bike, and the office with a city view for a porch that faces a lake. The silence that once terrified me is now my ally. It taught me that not every absence is a loss. Sometimes it's just space opening up so you can breathe again. And it was in that space that I started to relearn who I was, without masks, without noise, without guilt. I went back to consulting, but without the pressure of big contracts. Now I mostly work with small family-run businesses, helping others avoid the same traps that once brought me down. One day, a 68-year-old bakery owner told me, "You didn't just save my business, you saved my sleep." That hit me in a way I didn't expect. And in that moment I realized the justice I had chased back then was finally starting to spread. Sometimes I still get messages, people who've heard about the story, people asking if it's worth starting over. I don't give them rehearsed answers. I just tell them yes, not out of pride, but for peace. Because after going through a betrayal that calculated, revenge only matters if it comes with a life where you no longer have to look over your shoulder. And believe me, there's a kind of victory that makes no noise, but changes everything. Some people think the worst kind of pain is being left. But the truth is, what really hurts is being calmly deceived by someone you protected. I spent countless nights trying to understand how a person can plan a betrayal that deep without their voice even shaking. But now I see that I wasn't weak. I was all in. And when you give everything with your whole heart, the one who loses isn't you. It's the one who chose to lie. If you've made it this far, sincerely, thank you. Maybe this story touched something you're carrying too. If you've gone through something similar, in a relationship, at work, or even within your own family, this space is for you. Drop a comment, share what hurt, what you've overcome, or even what you're still trying to make sense of. Sometimes just saying it out loud is the first step toward healing. And if you connect with real stories, stories of people who fell and quietly rebuilt themselves, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Around here, we tell the stories most people hide, with honesty, with pain, but also with purpose, because everyone's carrying something, but only those who share it help others move forward.